product manager for the TSM data protection portfolio, and I'll take you through the portfolio in a minute, but it's always hard to speak after work. So I have a question for you guys. Who brought their checkbooks? We're going to announce a new version of TSM. Anyone? No? Okay.
Credit cards work?
Yeah, credit cards will work. So I'm going to talk about the next version of TSM that we're announcing today. But before I do that, I want to take you through what's in the portfolio and what are the products that I'm responsible for. And they all have to do with data protection. So the first product is Fastback for Workstations. Some of you might know it as CDP for Files, as it used to be called back in 2009. And the target market is laptop data protection. Now, pretty simple to use, 5 minutes to install, runs on Windows, which most of us run, and it keeps a copy of that data local on the laptop, so you can easily recover from a deleted file. If you, like me, you like to use Shift Delete, which means the file is gone the minute you hit yes, then it allows you to recover that. And obviously it can send the data for disaster recovery purposes to a data center. The next product is Fastback. Now, Fastback is a technology that IBM acquired about 4 years ago from a company called FilesX, and that's actually how I came into IBM about 4 years ago. And Fastback does things a little bit differently. First of all, it's disk to disk. It doesn't handle tapes. It doesn't know about tapes. It focuses on quick recoveries. It does block level incrementals, and it keeps the data locally. There's still a server-client relationship, but everything is kept on the server on spinning disks, allowing some unique recovery capabilities. So it got a Windows look and feel for it. Perfect match for remote offices. Now, Fastback, being a remote office, obviously has a built-in replication capability. Gives you the ability to take that data from the remote office, move it on to the data center for any kind of recovery scenarios, anything from a bare machine recovery and to a single file recovery. Now, Fastback, just to clarify, is not TSM. Don't expect the scalability that you get from TSM from Fastback server and remote office. The third product in the portfolio is Flash Copy Manager. And Flash Copy Manager is all about managing hardware snapshots. A lot of you, we talked a little bit about the tiers of storage, and especially at the high tiers of storage, you have hardware snapshots in there. And you want to utilize them in order to perform the most efficient data protection mechanisms that are available. Obviously, these are built into the controllers. But running a hardware snapshot without talking to the application is pretty much useless, or what we in the data protection call a crash consistent state, which means that when you go to recover from it, there's an if. Will I be able to recover all of the transactions from the database? Will I be able to roll it forward? Am I losing a couple of transactions? What's my window of time that I can roll back into? And that's what Flash Copy Manager does. It negotiates the terms of the snapshot between the application on one hand and the storage devices on the other hand. So making sure you get a completely consistent backup. Now, the fourth product that most of you probably know is TSM. And Tivoli Storage Manager is pretty much our flagship from IBM. It supports pretty much any operating system that's out there. It can write data to spinning disks, tapes, warm devices, and a couple of devices that I've never heard about. Probably it can support punch cards back that far. I mean, it's been around for probably 19, I think it's getting to its 20th anniversary, and has been the first in a couple of areas, including saving data to disk, progressive incremental, and a couple of other firsts that I think I have a whole slide on that. But from an OS perspective, we cover everything that's out there. Obviously, there are as someone around here asked about the support metrics, there are some platforms that are currently out of support or older versions supporting them, such as Novell's. Richard, help me out here.
SGI.
No,
Yeah,
no,
OS
not
2.
those two, but
Windows 2000.
well, some OSs have already gone out of support from the vendor perspective, but most of the new and established operating systems are supported, and we do our best to keep currency across the board. Now, each of those products can run as a standalone. You can use only Fastback for Workstation. You can use only TSM. But our story as a vendor becomes a lot more powerful when you tie them all together and apply the different methodologies that you get from each and every product to tie back into your enterprise management TSM. Now, let's talk about what we've done recently over the last 2 years or so. TSM 6.1 was announced back in 2009. Now, what did we do? We listened to some of our customers that told us, look guys, the database you have within TSM, that proprietary database, prevents us from scaling up. There's just, we can go up this high, there is a hard limit about the database size. Once the database grows over a certain size, it causes all sorts of challenges in management. So we ripped out the proprietary database that was, by the way, developed and maintained by IBM Research, and we replaced it with DB2. DB2 is known in the industry. It's a true relational database, allows us to scale higher than ever before. The second thing we did, we introduced built-in data deduplication. It's part of the base package. Initially with 6.1 it was server-side deduplication, meaning the data gets sent by the client over to the TSM server. The TSM server does its post-processing, finding all the duplicates and reducing the size of the data. Getting back to what Woj mentioned before, the whole purpose around it is allowing you to manage more with less. Less storage pools, less storage space, less servers, scale higher. With TSM 6.2 that came out late in 2010, we introduced a couple of things again. One of them is source-side data deduplication. So now the client doesn't have to send all the data over the LAN to the TSM server. It can do its own processing in order to enable you to reduce the amount of data sent over the wire. Especially useful if you're going over the WAN, directly from the remote office back to the data center. Just reduce the data, being able to do the backups over T1 lines. Automatic deployment of Windows client updates. How many of you have more than 50% Windows machines that they're managing? No one on that side. So Windows is probably still the most prevalent OS out there when you look at the enterprise, probably around 60 to 80% depending on what type of enterprise are you running. And one of the challenges that we're running into is how to manage that space. How many of you are still running TSM 5.5? And that's exactly the problem. How do I update my clients to the latest and greatest? So through the admin center, that will allow you to push the clients out, upgrade to the latest version of them, and keep on track. 5.5, just as a reminder, was released back in late 2007. So in IT terms, it's an age and a half ago, right? Support for VMware and Hyper-V. We'll talk a little bit more about virtualization as we progress, but basically most of us are either well into our virtualization project or it's already behind us, at least the initial stage, which says, well, let's get rid of all those physical machines, virtualize them, have less floor space, drive up utilization on the storage, etc., etc. All those things that are driving us toward virtualization. And the question is, now, how do I perform my backup? With Hyper-V, you can definitely run on the host, utilize the whole VSS framework to perform the data protection. VMware introduced vStorage API, which is an evolution of their VCBO, VMware Consolidated Backup. A lot faster. It's getting a lot more penetration in the marketplace, and we introduced that support back about a year ago. With TSM 622 that was released back in December 2010, we announced, again, support for VMware, Windows and N-Series NetApp environment. We did a new announcement earlier this year in the first quarter of TSM for virtual environment. A specialized client just like we have for Oracle, TSM for databases, TSM for mail, treating the VMware hypervisor as just another application. It gives you the best of both worlds, being able to do very efficient backup, including incremental backups, change block tracking, and as well as granular recovery, file level recovery from that image backup that you keep for data recovery purposes. The other thing we announced in the second quarter is TSM for unified recovery. And what's that all about? How many of you like the PVU licensing?
Oh, yeah.
How many of you know what PVU stands for? Yeah, that as I suspect. And usually when I talk about licensing terms, especially the PVU licensing terms, I have to hide behind the pole because my clients don't really like it. It's, on one side, it's relatively complex. How do I count all those cores? And IBM has tools for that, ILMT, etc. The other thing that bothered most of the people I talk to is that it doesn't align with the value that TSM brings to the table. You go through a server refresh, your cores, just all your machine just went from a dual core or a single core to a quad or double quad core, and the data hasn't changed, but the licensing costs have changed. So they're not aligned. So TSM Suite for Unified Recovery is a capacity-based license. Basically, it's a per terabyte charge, and together with that, we said, well, we give you everything that is within our arsenal, so you can use the right tool for the job. You're protecting Oracle databases, go ahead, use TSM for Oracle, so you can do that granular incremental RMON back. You want to do archiving, use HSM for Unix, etc., etc. Everything, well, almost everything that's within our portfolio and is developed in-house is included in that capacity offer. Now, let's talk about what's new and what's coming. And today's the day of the announcement, TSM version 6.3. That's the next version of the release. It's going to be available for electronic download on October 21st, and physical media is probably just early November. So what did we do? We mentioned scalability earlier, and we strive to increase that because, as Woj mentioned, the data is growing exponentially. Now, with TSM 5.5, you were capped at around 500 million objects. Equate that to a database size, we're talking about 500 gigabytes of TSM database size. With TSM 6.1, we tested it in-house and fully supported it as a statement because that's the number we tested it with 1 billion objects. Again, equates to about a terabyte of database size. TSM 6.2 came out last year. We doubled that. We said, tested in-house with 2 billion objects. That's roughly 2 terabytes of database size. Obviously, there are a couple of ways to think about it. Deduplication affects the number of objects, etc. But managing 2 billion objects with just a single TSM server. Now, with TSM 6.3, which I wanted to call TSM 6.4, let's see if you can guess why. 4 billion objects. But we're sticking with TSM 6.3. We tested it in-house with 4 billion objects, so we're doubling pretty much with every release. And the only limit we see is our test efforts. I've seen customers go beyond the 1 billion objects at the 6.1 time frame, the 2 billion object at the 6.2 time frame, and I'm pretty sure I'll see customers going to go over the 4 billion with the TSM 6.3. This is just our statement around it. What else? So we're introducing a new capability within the TSM server, which we call internally node replication. What's the idea here? Up until now, if you wanted to migrate data off your main site to a disaster recovery site, you had to go through a couple of available processes, either DRM, or you can export data to physical tapes, then import them at the disaster recovery type, or you can use HADR, which is coming from DB2 in conjunction with some sort of data management. So HADR would replicate the metadata, and that physical data management will move the data, and what? You have a TSM server at the disaster recovery site that you can flick a switch, turn on, and it will allow you to perform recoveries in a disaster recovery scenario. But since we introduced deduplication and many customers have moved to TSM 6.3 using deduplicated storage pool, and network has become a lot more common than it was 3, 4, 5 years ago, that's what we're leveraging here. We're giving you the capability of having 2 TSM servers set up, each of them protecting its own data center or an office, if you will, and they can transmit data between one another efficiently. If you are using deduplication client side, then only the new data flows over to the TSM server. That data never gets rehydrated. It gets moved over to the TSM server on the data disaster recovery side, and it can be used for recoveries. Now, for us, it's a first in TSM server, and I believe it's a first in the data protection industry for a capability that's built into the product, because now we have 2 TSM servers that are aware of a node data or a production server data, and they can be used for recovery purposes at this point. Currently, the situation is that you have a one-to-one relationship. Obviously, you can have a round robin, meaning the guy on site A is a disaster recovery for site B and vice versa. But for us, this is a stepping stone for something that you'll probably hear more about in the upcoming years, called global data management. The idea is to enable you to treat those TSM servers as a single entity. So if the data got backed up to site A, then got replicated to site B, and now something happened at site A that the TSM server over there is no longer available, your production server will be able to automatically fail over and continue the backup to site B. If you want to recover the data at site C, it should be able to pull the data from either TSM server. So everything flows transparently between those, and this is just the first step towards that vision. So from a customer perspective, what are you guys getting today is a hot standby server, very efficient data transfer between the two sites, and flexibility of configuration. Basically, you can set the replication policies on a per node basis, meaning per production server. So you replicate only your SQL database data. You're not replicating the OS data, etc. And there's always the challenge, especially for you guys with that big amounts of data, how do I do my initial data replication? And we took care of that. We call it the initial seed, or bootstrapping the replication, and there's a process to physically move the data to the disaster recovery site, and then carry on from there, moving the data incrementally. Next thing we've done here is reporting enhancements. Over the last couple of years, since TSM 6.1 came about, I heard a lot of complaints about our built-in reporting capabilities. So we completely revised that. Again, from a customer perspective, what we targeted is being able to install the entire reporting infrastructure within 2 hours. Being able to generate a customized report within 30 minutes. And those were challenges with the previous versions. And we completely, well, I wouldn't say we replaced. BERT, which is the reporting engine, is still there. And if you do have the capabilities or the skills to utilize BERT to its full extent, it's a great tool. There's no beating that. I mean, you can do pretty much whatever you want with it. However, we did introduce side-by-side and Cognos, which is an IBM acquisition about a year and a half old. And that gives you the ability to customize the report. It has a basic user interface, drag and drop, query analyzer, when you can say, well, I want to see this column and that column, sort them by date and time, present me with this report, and please email me that and report every day at 8 a.m. The other thing that this allowed us to do is give you some sort of a dashboard. Again, if I go back to TSM 5.5, operational reporting was a huge thing for you guys, and you wanted that back. So with the TSM reporting engine, we can leverage that. TSM reporting is all about historical data, utilizing it for projecting or business analysis. How is my storage growing? How much more storage pool will I need next year? Who is consuming more storage? Why did they grow? When did it happen, etc. So you get all of those historical reports. But another thing that's very important is the dashboard. What happened last night? When I come in the morning, do I need to look at that specific production server, or my tape library is all full and I need to do or take some action? That's what the dashboard is all about. What clients are taking the most space? What is the status of my tape library, etc. The next thing is backing up the TSM database. Obviously, I mentioned the whole scalability thing, but I did neglect to mention that, well, now that the database grew so fast, and I'm managing a 2.5 terabyte database, it takes a while to back it up, right? So up until now, it was a single-threaded process. You could still maintain it on a 2 terabyte database, but it's about time we move to the serious business, just like we're trading databases. Do multi-streaming. Being able to back it up in 4 parallel streams to separate tape cartridges, etc. And we tested this in the lab, and we actually saw an improvement move anywhere between 50 to 110%, depending on how you count it. Another thing, I mentioned the automatic client update. Initially it was for Windows only, but a lot of you, we said only 60 to 80% are Windows, the rest is something else. Linux, HPUX, AIX, etc. And we're introducing those with the TSM 6.3. Yeah?
Yeah, on the multi-streaming database, it's going to go to several. You cannot send it to one tape, it has to be several.
Once you do multi-streaming,
Repeat the question.
it has to do, so the question was, if I'm doing database backup with multi-streams, can they go into a single tape? The answer is no. Once you do multi-streams, they go into a couple of tapes in parallel in order to increase the efficiency of the restore as well as the backup. If you're doing multiplexing, it's going to, meaning sending a couple of streams of data into a single tape, it's going to affect your restore performance. The whole idea here is to be as efficient as possible in both backup and restore. Yes?
Would you be stacking multiple database backups on the same volume, or are you still limited to one volume per backup?
So the question was, can we utilize the same tape for multiple database backups, or is it same set of cartridges only for one database? I don't know the answer. I need to check. I believe and you can send multiple, but I'll need to double check on that.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I have a question that came in from the live stream from
Yes.
Matt. And the question is the node data replicated to the second site or the metadata to the second site, DB or both?
Repeat it.
Can you hear it?
Both.
Both? Okay.
Both, and it's all managed within the same TSM server. So the TSM server will handle both the data and metadata being transferred to the disaster recovery site.
Okay, and then there's a follow-up question that says, does the second site TSM server have full capabilities, backup and restore of the node?
Restore, yes. With the backup, currently at this release, you still have to do some manual steps in order to continue and do the backup to that target server. It can be done, but it requires some manual intervention.
Thank you.
They coming from where? Now I need to know where are they located physically. They're coming from China. What's the time zone? I mean,
He says, excellent, thank you.
you're welcome. Let's talk about virtual environments. As I mentioned before, we introduced TSM for virtual environment earlier this year. It's been a huge success, and I suspect it contributed a lot to the success of our capacity-based licensing because it's part of that package. So TSM for VE can give you pretty much, I'd say, anywhere between 90 to 100% of your data protection and recovery needs when it comes to protecting the VMware environment. And we're releasing TSM 6.3, TSM for virtual environment 6.3, that enhances that. The first thing is support for vSphere 5. vSphere 5 had been announced a couple of, probably 2 months ago. So it will be supported with this new release. And the other challenge that we had is, how do I manage this? Especially in big environments, I have thousands of virtual machines. I'm not talking to my VMware guys. I don't like them. I manage the backup. They manage the VMware. We don't like talking to each other. How do I manage it? How do we talk to one another? The VMware guys are all about, well, yeah, you have to do this through vCenter. And we're all about, well, we want to do this through the CLI. So that gives us the capability of either giving the VMware administrators a way to drive their backup into TSM, transparent to you guys, or giving them the ability to monitor what's going on within their environment. We treat them as the application owner. They own the infrastructure. We do the backup. Same thing for restores. And that's very important. When you do the backup, I mean, at the end of the day, no one cares about the backup. No one wants to hear about the backup. All we want to hear is, well, the backup's done. Everything is green, we're all happy. All everybody cares about is about the restore. How fast can you get me that virtual machine back? Oh, someone deleted my file, I want it back. Which file is that? I'm not sure it was over there. I want the version from 3 weeks ago. So how efficient can that be? How quick can that be done, etc. So I believe we achieved world domination with that feature, being able to pull that single file back without restoring the entire virtual machine, putting it back in place as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Can I ask a question about that
Sure.
slide? You've got Red Hat Linux and SLES up there.
Yep.
Is that going to be Linux under Z as well, or is this just the x86 versions?
So TSM for VE is specifically focusing about VMware environment. VMware defined X, right? x86. And what this bullet point talks about is, in a VMware environment, there's a notion of the data mover, the proxy server, the vStorage backup server, and with TSM for VE 6.2, it had to run on Windows. With 6.3, it can run either on Windows or Linux. Now, all those data protection methodologies, vStorage API, etc., are not applicable to Z-Linux. That's a different hypervisor, and that can be protected by TSM as well, but not by TSM4B. That's a standard backup archive.
Well, where I'm going with that though is, you're in a virtual environment here, right? And the first thing I've got to do is install another server,
Yep.
which is like, and on TSM, which also runs in the Linux for Z, right? I have a virtual environment that runs in a real virtual environment. And yet you're giving me one more thing where I've got to buy another server. Why can't I virtualize that in my real virtual environment on Z, like Linux on Z?
So there are a couple of moving parts here, and a lot of times, at least I get the terminology wrong. You have that TSM server, right? That can run anywhere. It can be any TSM server. It can be a TSM 5.5 running on Z, TSM 6.3 running on Z Linux, whatever server. There's another component that is the data mover. This talks to VMware on this side, sends data to TSM server on the other side. That guy can be either Windows or Linux. It can be either physical or virtual, whatever works for you. Does that answer your question?
No, because
So I'm missing something.
is it, why can't that Linux be Linux under Z as well? Why does it have to run Linux x86? If it's,
Gotcha.
it can run virtual,
Yep.
why can't I put that on my TSM platform as well?
Understood. What most people want to do with that data mover is one of two things. Most of them want to run it inside their VMware. I have 15 ESX hosts. I want a virtual machine either on each ESX host, so I spin up another virtual machine that handles the data protection for that ESX. Another option is set up a physical server. It has its own, everything has its pros and cons. So if it's a physical server, it doesn't participate in the workload on that ESX, etc. You can do LAN-free backups, for example. So you set it up on a physical server. That's why we chose to initially go with either the x86 running on the VMware-based x86, or the physical machines, which are usually, since it's only the data mover, you don't want to utilize an AIX box to be the data mover. It's not cost efficient. I hear you on the Z Linux. I'll need to check. I suspect, by the way, that the answer is that if you're running on the Z Linux, then you're not part of the VMware infrastructure, and the data will have to move over the LAN from the stores into Z Linux and then into the TSM server. But it might be applicable. I'll need to double check on that.
I have a question. How would I be able to know if a backup failed on this kind of environment? Because the only thing I know is...
Yep, great. A perfect setup for the next slide. So how do I know if a backup failed? I mentioned the UI. And the UI runs within vCenter. It gives you, if you look, it's hard to see here, but on the left-hand side, you have the usual vCenter tree hierarchy where you see the data store, the ESX host into a single virtual machine. And when you select that virtual machine, on the right-hand side, you'll be able to configure the data backup. It will also tell you, okay, I have those backups or no backups at all. So you can, just by looking at vCenter, you'll be able to see. Now, your next question is probably going to be, well, if I missed my last backup, is it going to show up with a red X sign on it? I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that if you look here at the dashboard, it's going to show up. Fair enough? That's the reporting dashboard as opposed to the vCenter UI where you can also see.
Okay, that is on the TSM side. You'll see that. On
Yep.
the TSM side. Okay.
This is on the TSM side. The other piece is on the VMware side. Now, after virtual environment, let's talk about Z. And back when we announced TSM 6.1, we said, well, it doesn't run on Z. It runs only on 16 different other platforms, but not Z. With TSM 6.3, we're launching TSM for ZOS Media. What's the idea here? All of our Z customers can continue, finally upgrade from TSM 5.5, continue to use their current infrastructure. They still have a component running on native Z, allows them to use Python storage, etc. The TSM server itself is running on Z Linux or AIX and moving the data to that ZOS media that runs natively on Z. So it should be transparent from your perspective. Other key enhancement, VTL enhancement. One of the, again, repeating motives is with VTL, virtual tape libraries, is, well, they're not really tape libraries. Allow us to use them for what they really are, which is spinning disks. My answer that, well, if it's spinning disks, just use it as a file device, apparently doesn't resonate well within my customer base. So we're enhancing that, giving you the ability to utilize multiple mount points, for example. And we're going to further enhance that. Journal-based backup for Linux, which was a big thing for us, and this is true across the board. It's something that we implemented. It is not dependent on the file system. 64-bit client support. That's basically, obviously, where the world is going. Native 64-bit. So all of our clients has moved away from the 32-bit implementation. There are a couple of other updates to some of the other components. I'm going to skip that and talk about why the four of you guys that are still on 5.5 should upgrade to TSM 6. First of all, reduce your cost. You can manage so much more with TSM 6 when you compare it to TSM 5. We talked about the database scalability, meaning relatively 1:8 consolidation ratio. You can take 4, 5, 6 TSM 5.5 server, consolidate them to a new TSM 6 server. BrandQ has a different basic footprint or minimal requirements. If you're going to use deduplication in order to reduce your costs even further and manage the operational data on spinning disks, it will require more memory. But it's so much more efficient than the TSM 5.5. Simplify the administration. I talked about DB2. Our purpose with DB2, although we talk about DB2 scalability, etc., from the administrator perspective, it should be transparent. You should not know that it's a DB2 database versus, well, who's our main competitor in the database world?
We have no real competitor.
We have no competitor. So it's not a MySQL database. Application availability. Be able to utilize, first of all, the right tools. Do flash copy managers. Use fastback where appropriate. Do the database backup, the internal database backup more efficiently. And best of all these functions that I mentioned before are free. It's all part of the base packet, especially if you're on capacity-based licensing, as I mentioned before. The idea is to give you the right tool to do the job. Now, let's talk about other product enhancement at this time frame in October. Flash Copy Manager. How many of you guys are using Flash Copy Manager? Fair enough. None. So you should, especially if you have IBM hardware. Now, Ron's going to talk later about virtual storage, how to manage storage efficiently, etc. But so I'll go first and talk about Flash Copy Manager. As I said, Flash Copy Manager is a negotiator. It talks to the application on one side, to storage devices on the other side, making sure they all work together. It supports DB2, Oracle, SAP on the open systems, Exchange, SQL, etc. on the Windows platform, and gives you full application recoverability. We're going to introduce a couple of things. The first one is NTFS support for Windows. So basically any application that runs on Windows can now be protected by Flash Copy Manager. And on Windows, it doesn't really matter what type of hardware you have, because we're leveraging the VSS framework. So if you're not running IBM storage, you can still leverage Flash Copy Manager to do your data protection fast, efficient, then send it off to a TSM server for safekeeping for long-term retention. The other thing we're introducing is support for VMware, treating that as an application. So how does that work? The initial step from a Flash Copy Manager perspective, go back to the vCenter UI, the VMware administrator went in there and said, I want to back up VM1 and VM2. That's all I want to back up. So our first step from Flash Copy Manager is go to VMware and tell it, okay, perform a software snapshot. That's what VMware does, VM1 and VM2. So it creates those small files that sit along the virtual disks and make it consistent, crash consistent from a VMware perspective. It might be even better depending on the OS you're running within that. The next step is Flash Copy Manager says, well, now I better find out which LANs or which volumes do these virtual disks reside on. So it goes ahead, identifies the two LANs that are part of the current configuration, and performs a snapshot. Triggers the hardware, say, create a point-in-time copy at this point. Now, if you don't use TSM, at this point you're done. You have a persistent copy of your VM1 and VM2 from a specific point in time that you can roll back to. However, if you do have TSM in your shop, you can still use all of the great features of TSM for VE to move the data off to TSM, store it on tape for long-term retention, etc. Do a granular file recovery. Now, recoveries are slightly different than TSM for VE because, well, you have the snapshots on the hardware. Why not utilize them? So if you want to do a full VM restore, easy enough. You reverse the process of the initial snapshot, attach it to the VMware hypervisor and tell it, go ahead, set up the new virtual machine and move the data back to the primary storage. You want to do granular recoveries, almost as easy. You attach it back to VMware and you said, well, take this VMDK, expose it back to a virtual machine. It pops up as a drive letter, as a /user/bin, whatever you decide to assign to it. And then you can just go ahead and grab a single file out.
Can I just and in that instance you don't care about the underlying hardware for the storage?
With VMware, you do. Because we're sitting here talking to the storage directory. We do not have the benefits at this point of utilizing the VSS framework. We have to trigger the storage directly. In this case, it is IBM storage. Windows environment is just any storage that has a VSS provider. Now, just to give you a taste of what Flash Copy Manager looks like, it's completely, especially in the Windows area, completely integrated with Windows. The UIs go through MMC, the natural application owner look and feel for Exchange, for SQL, etc. On Unix, it's more of a CLI approach. I want to back up this SAP. I want to do it every day, every week, whatever you want to set up. Now, another thing we're introducing specifically for Exchange is granular file recovery. Some of you might be familiar with that from the Fastback product. Very similar capability for utilizing hardware snapshots. We're backing up 50 database, 50 Exchange databases at the same time, but unfortunately the most common request we get, well, I just got my new iPhone, I synced it the wrong way, and my entire mailbox is gone, or just a specific folder is gone. I need to recover only a single email. So from that perspective, it has that great drag and drop capability that allows you to go back into that person's mailbox from yesterday at 4 p.m. and just select that folder, drag it back to his existing mailbox, and be done with it. That's it. Questions? And by the way, can the guys on the internet participate in the takeaways? There are 2 giveaways for the first 2 questions, so
We'll
I
send
might
it
be
to
able
them
to-
virtually.
yeah, throw it hard enough.
Yeah, how is the upgrade different from moving from a 5.5 to a 6? Right now we're on a 6.15 to a 6.3.
From a 6.15,
Yeah.
where did you start? With which version did you start with TSM?
Well, wow. From 4 something we started.
It's pretty similar to the point releases that we've had so far.
Okay.
Obviously, there's some of you guys on the 5.5 are being challenged by the move to 6 because it's a big upgrade. We changed the database. It requires some either doing an in-place upgrade of the database, which requires some time, some downtime, or redefining our policies.